What's up, Professor Wergeles here. I am going to show you how to install Angular. I'm just going to do a Hello World app, and I'm going to show you how to output that to the server. Now, this isn't that difficult, so I want to run through it to make sure it's very clear because people are starting to try different ways that make it really difficult. So let's go through this. I'm at angular.io, and I'm going to click on Get Started. Now, it's pretty easy to set up Angular. You'll see your first app. It actually recommends to use StackBlitz, and that's why we recommended you to use StackBlitz. However, StackBlitz makes it hard to export your project, as well as you want this to run on your server. If you want to get a quick app up in StackBlitz, that's really nice and easy to do. However, for the exploration, I recommend you putting this on your own server because then you can understand how Angular works and how everything gets compiled back to an HTML file and how everything gets compiled back to JavaScript. Now, if you already got it working on StackBlitz, that's fine. This tutorial is to help you get an Angular app running on your LAMP stack because essentially Angular is a framework that's used to make web applications. Now, when I use Angular and I say, okay, build this app, technically everything gets converted back to HTML and everything gets converted back to JavaScript. Even though we're writing TypeScript, the browser is going to read it in as JavaScript. So when I do a production version with my Angular app, it outputs JavaScript, it outputs HTML, it outputs CSS, and then that gets loaded into the browser. Okay, so that's why I recommend using your own server for this exploration so you can understand that whole process. That way in the future, if you want to put an Angular app on a LAMP stack, you want to put Angular app on a Node stack, so a mean stack, or even if you want to put an Angular app on an IIS server, if you're using .NET, you can use Angular on .NET. It doesn't really matter the server because all browsers read HTML. Okay, so that's what makes Angular so popular. You use Angular, you build a site, they have all these nice modules, they have all these sweet commands, so I can make a website with a little amount of code. So a few hundred lines of code, I can make this beautiful app, but technically after you compile that app, there's thousands of lines of code because the library makes everything easier to write. Now, if I scroll down, it goes through a tutorial, so I recommend you go through this tutorial, learn the directives, learn the proper syntax. Now, what I'm going to do is set up Angular. So first, let's set up Angular. Then you pick the tutorial you want to go through, and then make sure you submit that to Canvas and GitHub Classroom. Here you need to install Node. So you just click on the Node link. You'll see the latest stable release is 10.16. So I'm just going to click on this, do a quick download, open up the package manager. Okay, just run through. So I'm going to install. So agree to all the licenses. Go ahead and click on install. It should be fairly quick. Okay, Node is pretty light. What's going to happen is you're going to get Node.js and you're going to get the Node package manager, okay, which is very important. So you see if I come back, it says you need the Node's package manager. It says you need Node's package manager. Now, usually this is going to get installed after you download Node.js, but if you need some help with the commands or how to install NPM, you can click this link here. Go back, you'll see it's almost finished. You see, make sure that user local bin is in your path. So I'm going to copy this path here. Click on close, move it to the trash, come back to the terminal. Let me clear all this up. That's from the previous video. Click path, and you should see user local bin somewhere. Okay, so that's all set up correctly. Now, it says I need to install Angular CLI. So I come over here, I install globally, that's what the -G is, Angular CLI, which is going to help me build Angular apps. So it's the command line interface. So if you want to know Angular CLI, you can see all the different commands that you can do. Usually the tutorial will help you go through the commands. You'll see Angular CLI is a command line interface to automate your development workflow. It allows you to create new Angular applications. You can create directives. You can create modules. Okay, everything that you need to create is going to be through Angular CLI. Don't go on your terminal or don't go through, Finder and make a new file. Every time you make a new file, make sure you use Angular CLI. For example, I'm going to make a new app. So the tutorial says make a new app called My App. So I'm going to cd into my documents. I have a GitHub directory, and I'm going to call Angular CLI and make a new application called My App. Now this may take some time. It needs to set up the structure. We are going to use Angular routing, or it depends on what you're doing. You may not need Angular routing. Make sure you follow the tutorial. This is simply to create a Hello World page and show you how to upload that to the server and then how to upload that to GitHub Classroom. So I'm going to choose yes, and then you could choose Sass or SCSS. I'm just going to choose regular CSS. Okay, it depends on what you're trying to do. It's going to create the structure. So it's creating all these components, all the modules, all the different directories. It's going to create your package.json, which has all of the node modules that you may need. It's going to create your .git file, so it's going to make a repository for you. Now, with Exploration 1, you can remember Challenge 2. For Challenge 2, I gave you a tutorial that I wanted you to go through. You went through the PHP tutorial, and it had a bunch of code for you, but you added just a little bit more. You did more than the tutorial. One, you made sure that it didn't upload an image to the database. It actually uploaded the image's path. And two, you made a page to display those images, whether you specified an ID in the URL, or maybe you showed all the images and you clicked on one, and then that opened up the image automatically. So depending on what you did, you went above and beyond that tutorial. Now for the exploration, I want you to do the same thing. Instead of me giving you a tutorial, I want you to pick a tutorial. If you selected Angular, that's good. If you selected other things, that's fine too. Make sure you reference that tutorial, otherwise you'll get a 0. Now, when you're going over that tutorial, go line by line, go over the tutorial, make sure you're learning what the tutorial is teaching you, and then make sure you go above and beyond that tutorial. Just like Challenge 2, you use that tutorial as the base, and then you built on top of it. Same for Exploration 1. Instead of me giving you a tutorial, you're going to pick the tutorial, and then make sure you go above and beyond that tutorial, and then output the code, upload it to the server. Now the server is for the TA to run your code, and then you're going to submit your code to Canvas. That's going to be our main source for submission. And then you're also going to submit the code to GitHub Classroom. If GitHub Classroom works, we may not submit the code on Canvas anymore. We may just submit it on GitHub Classroom. We're going to see how that goes. So for Exploration 1, you pick the tutorial, go above and beyond the tutorial. You get to decide how much you go above and beyond the tutorial. It should be similar to Challenge 2. If you do something similar to Challenge 2, you should be in the clear. If you go above and beyond what we did in Challenge 2, then there's an opportunity for bonus points. So if you go above and beyond the entire class and you do something extraordinary, you spend a lot of time on it, there's a good chance that you'll get bonus points. Okay, you'll see that took a while. It's building the skeleton. It set everything up. And once it sets it up, you're going to use the node CLI. You're going to use Angular CLI to build everything. So if I need a component, if I need a module, you're going to use the Angular CLI because it's going to add it into this skeleton for you. So it's going to set everything up. I'm going to cd into my app. If I do an ls-la, you're going to see it created a .git. So this is a repository. It created the README. It has your package.json. So that's all the modules that you may need. And then you have the source. So if I open this up, okay, if I open this up, it's going to be in my documents inside GitHub. inside my app, if I go into source, technically all you have is an index.html file. So that's going to be the default page that opens up. You're going to have the main TypeScript. Inside the app directories, all your components, all your modules. Okay, so here's app.component. That's going to be the first page that loads. And technically, it's just HTML at this point. You may see some Angular directives and others. Make sure you go through those so you know those for class. I'm not going to go through that too much in this video. I just want to show you how to build this thing. Now, I have VS Code here, so I'm going to open up VS Code. I'm going to show you how nice it is. So if you, in VS Code, you click on Open. Okay, I'm going to open up My App. So I click on My App, click on Open, and it's going to open up the entire directory structure here. Now, VS Code is really good for Angular, so that may be part of your exploration. For Exploration 1, you go through a tutorial, you set up VS Code, you install Node on your local machine, then you set up an Angular app, you run through a tutorial, make a small app, make sure you output that to the production version, and then put it up on your server. The TA will run your code on the server, check your code in the submission, check to make sure you reference the tutorial, check to make sure you just didn't submit the tutorial to make sure you went above and beyond. If you just go through the tutorial and submit what's in the tutorial, you probably won't be happy with your grade. So make sure you go above and beyond that tutorial and add your own content into the application. Okay, here you'll see I have the source, I have the app. I can open up the app's component. Here's the title. So I could say Professor Wergely's app. Okay, so I saved that. You'll see the different environment variables. So remember, with Angular, I have this index.html file. Here's your 5 required tags. It has the extra requirements to pass the validator. It has the meta tag for a responsive viewport. Then you have your body, and then you have your app root. So what's cool about Angular, it's a single page application. All of the modules, all the components are going to be inserted into the app root. You have one HTML file, and you're going to use JavaScript or TypeScript to dynamically insert all the content into the app root. When I click on let's say a navbar element, go to a new page, technically you're not going to a new page, just a new page is being inserted into the app root. Now remember, Angular is just a framework to build web applications. So I'm writing TypeScript here, but when I compile Angular, it's going to be compiled back to JavaScript because the browser reads HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so if I use TypeScript, I like TypeScript because you can specify the types of the variables. You can be very specific. It's more Java oriented. So you can specify the variable type, the variable name, the variable's value. You can specify rules. You can have interfaces. You can have classes. You can have constructors. So it's more specific. It's more defined. So it's easier to write the code. It's easier to debug the code. A lot of times with JavaScript, you get a bug and you don't know what's happening. With TypeScript, maybe the types are different, and that's why the bug occurred. Okay, so that's one reason TypeScript is so popular with Angular. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to learn TypeScript, but actually it really helps you write web applications. It makes it much easier to debug. Now, when I compile TypeScript, it's going to be converted back to JavaScript, which we're going to see here soon. So if I open up the HTML file, I can change some content. You'll see title app is running. Maybe I add something here. It may not look good. I'm just going to add something so you can see it change. So this is Professor Wergely's application. I'm going to close the H1. I'm going to save the code. Now, let's say you went through a tutorial, you installed VS Code, you went through and made your own app, you added your own content, so you went above and beyond the tutorial, you referenced the tutorial in the code, and on your documentation. So you may specify tutorial begins here and tutorial ends here. This is my own custom code. That way the TA can grade it easily. Now I'm done. I want to put this up on my server so the TA can run my code. Now, if you got it working on StackBlitz, that's okay for Exploration 1. However, I recommend you take the time, go and put it up on your server so you can get the feel for Angular, get the feel for single-page applications, and see that Angular is just a framework to build websites. It's nothing more than that. After I compile all the code, you'll see what happens here. So if I come back to the tutorial, I can serve the app. So let's see what it looks like on my local machine. That's the other thing. A lot of students, what they were trying to do was they were installing Node on their server. They were installing Angular on their server. They build up an app on their server, and then they try to serve the page on their server using port 4200. Well, then they go to their domain, so professorworglys.com, port 4200, and it wasn't working. I actually sat with that student. We opened up the ports. We took down the firewall. We tried everything to get that app running. You'll see here it's on localhost 4200 Webpack Dev Server. Well, what's happening here is it's going to start a Node server on port 4200, and it's going to run this app. Now, trying this on the server, we had a really hard time to get that to work. So I don't recommend that you do that. What I recommend is implement everything on your local machine. You'll see the changes here. You'll see the changes here. So I've changed the default page. So run everything on your local machine. Once it's done, do a production build and upload that to the server, which I'm going to show you how to do right now. So everything looks good. Let's say I'm done. I went through the tutorial. I added a little bit extra. I can do a Control-C to stop. What I really like about Angular is once you do a serve, you can come back to the code, change something, you'll see the command line changes, and it actually is going to update in real time. So that's really cool about Angular. If I come back to the tutorial here, you'll see getting started. You can use StackBlitz, which is nice for a quick setup, but I really recommend that you put it up on your server, which is going to be the deployment here. Now in deployment, it says to do a build production. So let's try this. I'm going to do a build production. It's going to take some time, especially on the first time. And you'll see once it's done, it's going to put everything in the distribution folder under my project's name. So it's going to be called My App. Now, you'll see everything static and can be hosted on any web server capable of serving files. So it could be Node.js, Java, .NET, it could be a LAMP stack, it could be Apache, or any backend like Firebase, Google Cloud, Amazon AWS. So technically it's a static page because it's a single page application. You don't have any backend here unless you were to connect to backend, but probably in the tutorial you won't. So it's a static web page that's changing dynamically because it's a single page application. That's what we looked at in class today, and can be hosted on any web server. So that really makes Angular powerful. You can put it on .NET, you can put it on Java, Node, LAMP, Apache, whatever. As long as it can host an HTML page, which pretty much any server can, the browser is going to read that HTML page and it's going to load without a problem. Now, later we are going to host an Angular app on Firebase. So if you want to host on Firebase, that may be the tutorial that you go through. That may be a good experience to do. And actually, it's really easy. You just install Firebase tools and you say, go ahead and push it up to Firebase. But we're going to be talking about Firebase, so whether you do this or not, it's up to you. I recommend putting it up on your AWS server. I want you to get a feel for that. So going through Firebase may be something extra, but make sure you put it up on your LAMP stack. Get a feel for doing the production version. Get a feel that this is just a single page application. It's just outputting HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you don't have that feel, if you don't experience that, you think Angular is its own programming language and it's this thing that only certain things can run. Oh, I can only run it on a Node server. That's not true. Okay, it can be ran on any server just like you saw in the documentation. It's a static page at this point. JavaScript's changing the page, there's no backend. So unless you hook up backend, usually you would hook up a node server for the backend, but technically you can hook up anything. You can hook up PHP, you can hook up .NET, C#. Okay, Angular is just a framework to build the front end, connect it to the backend. Now Angular is really nice. Angular is really nicely built with Firebase. So we're going to be learning Firebase here soon. You'll see the generation's complete. So I come over here to my app. If you go into the distribution directory under my app, you'll see all the outputted code. Now look, we're writing TypeScript. It outputs an HTML file. You'll see a bunch of JavaScript files. One of the JavaScript files is just to make sure it runs on different browsers. Okay, so you got a bunch of JavaScript files, that's fine. You're gonna, and a CSS file. So you're gonna take all this, and I'm on FileZilla. So I'm gonna connect to the server, go back to your site manager, connect to the server. I'm in my user directory. I'm going to go into professorwergles.com in the public HTML directory. Now, I recommend creating an explorations directory. So I'm going to create explorations. You may have a challenge directory. And in the explorations directory, I'm going to create a directory called E1 for exploration 1, or you could spell exploration 1 out, depending on what you want to do. Now, what I'm going to do is copy all the outputted code into this directory. Now, if you do it correctly, it should work. Now let's check. Now let's take a look. So I'm going to go over here to the web, go to professorwergles.com. I'm going to do /explorations and then /E1. Now, this is known as the white page syndrome. It's the white page of death, and it's one of the biggest problems because you don't get an error. You don't know what's going on. You try to put index.html. It's not working. I don't know what to do. Well, it was designed to be ran on our local machine, which was on a local node server. But now we put it in Explorations E1. So all the paths are messed up for the routing and for the page loading. So we need to add this path here for the page to load correctly. So what you do is you come back, you build it again. Let me see if they have an example. They may not have an example for this. But essentially, you're going to build it again. And you're going to add this in here. So you're going to say ng build. You're going to add the base href, which is whatever directory is on your server. So explorations and then E1. And then you're still going to build the production version. So all I did was make the Hello World app. I am outputting the production build, which outputs, an HTML file, JavaScript, and CSS, because that's all that's needed to run on the browser. And that's the browser, and that's what the browser is able to load. But I need to specify the path here. So once I put the path, it may take a little bit to run. We'll upload this to the server. After specifying the base href, it should work. Now you could do this in the code as well. If you open up Visual Studio Code and you go into the app module TypeScript, I believe it's in the component. Where did I see that? Okay, let's go into the index.html. So here's the index.html, and here's the base href. Now it's saying it's just your local directory, but that's not true. We put it in explorations and then E1. So I could change the base ref here, but normally you're going to change it in the command line. Try not to add too much manually, because it may need to change in many places. If I do it through the command line here, so I'm using Angular CLI, it's going to put it in all the correct locations. In addition, if I change it in the code, it may mess up when you serve the page. So if I do an ng serve on my local machine, this may mess it up. But here I'm adding the base href only on the production build. Okay, so I recommend using Angular CLI as much as possible. Do a Google search, see if there's a command. If there's a command, run the command. Now, if I go back, you'll see my app was destroyed, a new one's created. I'm gonna go back to the server, take all this other code off, put the new code on, give it a little bit of time to update, go back to the browser, refresh, booyah, you should see the page. Okay, so make sure you specify the base href. Once you do that, it should work. Okay, we have installed Angular, we installed Node, we built a Hello World page. We saw that Angular is just a single page application. It's nothing special. All it is a framework that helps you build web apps easier. So I can write just a few lines of code, which would take me hundreds of lines of code to do with regular JavaScript and HTML. So if I have regular HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, which those are the languages of the web, it would take forever. But if I use Angular, they already have, let's say, Material CSS. I could just use a class. It's already well set up. I can use TypeScript, so I can put the types on the variables, which is easier to debug and less error prone. Then I build it, and it builds right back into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is exactly what we learned in Web Application Development 1 or 2830. Angular just helps us build those web pages easier. Now that it's working, let's quickly show you how to upload it to the GitHub Classroom. So let's say I'm done. I wrote the journal. Everything's done. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do a clone. In the previous video, you should have seen the clone. So I've already cloned this. Essentially, we don't want the production build. You can include this in your uploaded code, but we want the actual code here, the source file. Now, you're going to get a bunch of node modules. We don't need all of these node modules. That's going to take forever to upload. As long as you specified the package JSON and did it correctly, this is all we need. You may specify a README. So here it says ng serve. It tells you how to run the app, which is very helpful. You'll see it says run ng build to build the project. You can use the production flag for the production build. Okay, so it tells you how to run the app. That's really helpful. If we need to do anything special for your app, make sure you include it in the README. I'm going to open up another directory. Essentially, I'm going to copy this into the directory for the challenge. Okay, so I've already cloned the one for the challenge. Go back to the previous video. It's right here in BMX Nick 1, and here's the code. So essentially, I'm done with the code. I'm going to do a Control A here. The only thing we don't really need are the node modules because that's really huge. So I'm going to take everything and put it over here in the code. Now, I already had a README file in there, so it's up to you. I'm going to do a replace. And then I had this file in here. I'm going to remove it. That was just for an example in the old file. So now I've added all my Angular code without the node modules because that's really huge. I'm going to go back. I'm going to do a git status. Okay, I need to add a bunch of files. So let's just do a git. I can do a git add period, or I can do a -a. So I'm just going to do a period to add the entire directory, or you can do a -a. So if I do another git status, you'll see I've added them all. You could have done a period there as well. There's a bunch of ways to do it. Now I'm going to do a git commit -a for all -m, merging my Angular code. Okay, I do a commit, then I'll do a git push origin master. That's going to go up to the GitHub Classroom. Make sure you submit this on time. The Canvas one will be the most important one. So here's all the code here. So we're going to open up the source. We're going to go through the code. We're going to make sure that you went above and beyond the tutorial. And that's all you need. Here's my README file that I decided to use. And that's it. So it's not that difficult. Now, if I'm uploading this to Canvas, here's my app. Okay, you'll see I actually moved all the files here. I didn't want to move all of them. I should have copied them. But essentially, if I'm uploading this to Canvas, I'll just zip this here. You can actually remove the node modules because that's really huge, but I'll just compress this, upload it to Canvas. Or maybe I have a big directory called Exploration 1. I have a directory called Journal. I have a directory called Screenshots. And then I have a directory called Code. And I put my app into the code. And I zip the whole thing and submit it up on Canvas. Okay, hopefully this video helps. Just know Angular is a framework to build web apps. It all gets compiled back to HTML, CSS, JavaScript. GitHub Classroom is really easy. You just clone the repository, put your code in there, put your screenshots, put your journal, put whatever else is needed, and then push that back up to the master branch. Let us know if you need any help. Professor Wergely signing out.